Good afternoon, everyone. Assalamu alaikum. Peace be upon all of you. My name is Sharik Abdul Ghani, and I am the director of Minaret Foundation, where our focus is to lift American Muslim voices for change through multi-faith and civic engagement. We're here joined today by Representative Jon Rosenthal of Texas HD 135 in a hotly contested district, as I'm told. And he is part of our candidate Q&A series where we are interviewing legislators and hopeful legislators in Congress, at the state level, even at the local level, to talk more about issues that concern the Muslim community and the multi-faith community at large. Jon, thank you for joining me today.
Thanks so much for the invitation. I'm so happy to be with you today.
And prior to us getting started, in fact, we're a couple minutes late because Jon had this amazing story. Jon, would you like to share the story with us?
Okay, so here's the little factoid that most people have never heard about me. Those that don't know, I'm a mechanical engineer from oil and gas, but I was born in the San Francisco Bay Area, and my daddy was a graduate student at Stanford at the time, and we lived in Berkeley, California. And I went to Thousand Oaks Elementary School, and those who remember the debate, the presidential debate with Kamala Harris and Joe Biden and those folks, Kamala talked about she was bused to Thousand Oaks Elementary School. So the fun fact is Kamala Harris and I went to elementary school together. Wow. I was at that school 1968, 69, 70, and in 1969 she was bused in. And then actually in 71 I was bused to a black neighborhood. So I wouldn't remember her individually, but we were in the same school. I remember the influx of the black kids coming in and mixing our community, and then the following year, 2 years later, I went to a black community. So we were part of the same busing program.
Wow, that's and how did that influence your life to see desegregation?
So actually, it's part of an overall landscape that I grew up inside of. So I just said my father was a graduate student at Stanford. He was a professor of mathematics, and he taught at UT Berkeley in my earliest years. And so I grew up in a household that was an academic community. It was integrated, you know. If you walk around in graduate academic circles and even undergraduate academic circles, it's an integrated society. So I really grew up in integrated schools everywhere we lived. Berkeley, California, Columbus, Ohio, at Ohio State University, Urbana, Illinois. I went to a 50-50 high school. So I just lived in integrated communities all of my life. And when we finally moved to Austin, Texas, and my dad took a job at the University of Texas, was my first experience in a community that was not integrated. And it made me very uncomfortable as an early teenager to be in a school that was 95% white or something. And I actually went to a guidance counselor on the second day of class, right after we moved here. And I said, are there any black kids in this school? Because I haven't seen any. And the counselor lady says, I think we have one. I think we have one here. At the time, student body there was 1,000 kids.
Reminds me when I was in elementary and middle school, I was like, am I the only brown kid here? Like, what's going on? Definitely not the same experience. I get that, but I can relate to that portion of something at least.
Yeah, but I grew up in integrated societies, and I'm from a mixed religion household. So my father was raised Jewish, and my mother was raised non-denominational Christian.
Oh wow!
So wow. I have lived an integrated life. I really have.
Well, Jon, you're running for HD 135. Which part of the city does that encompass?
I am House District 135 is an area of Northwest Houston around 1960 and 290. So it includes Copperfield, Jersey Village, a little bit of Cypress. If you know the intersection, let's see if I can make this happen. There's an X shape that 290 and 1960 create, and the district grows out like a bow tie from that intersection.
Right. We have a very large and growing community of Muslims out there. Notably, Cypress Islamic Center, the Islamic Outreach Center of Cypress, and many others that are up and coming in that area.
Yeah, I've actually,
really
for the last year, sorry to interrupt you, but for the last year, I've been working on starting up a Sisterhood of Salam Shalom out here.
Oh,
And we're
okay.
having,
Wait, hold on a
yeah,
second. John, you understand that the Sisterhood of Salam Shalom is for sisters.
yes, yeah. So I'm supporting their creation.
Oh,
I'm
you're
not
supporting
part
the
of the.
creation. I thought you were trying to be like one of the co-founders. That's not going to
No,
fly.
no, 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 no. Somebody, part of the group, reached out to me. Actually, two ladies reached out to me and said, "We'd like to start a conversation circle in your area, and can you help us connect with some of the Jewish community out there? Because we've got Muslim faith community is easier to find. It's funny that there are 0 synagogues in my district, so it's a little bit harder to find a Jewish faith community out here, but still working on it. And the Sisterhood is starting their conversation circle.
Yeah, having a synagogue out there would be good. I've told this to many of my rabbinical, my friends, my friends who are rabbis, because it's hard to get mosques paired with synagogues that are halfway across the city.
Exactly.
But enough about interfaith. Let's talk about your platform. Could you, John,
Okay.
could you tell us a little bit, give us your top platform issues?
So it's exactly the same as what called me to originally run. And so the things that are important to me and the things that are important, I believe, to the people of the district and the people of Texas are public education, healthcare. For me, it's criminal justice reform and fighting racism, discrimination, and bigotry in all of its forms. And so those were the big drivers. And I should have brought the campaign card. The literature that I put out is exactly the same piece that I designed myself in 2018. And all I did was change the logo and the election dates. I'm still preaching the same song.
So we're going to be consistent like Bernie Sanders.
I guess I just believe in the same stuff, and we got work to do in all those areas.
Sure. Well, then let's dive right in. Let's talk about healthcare. For decades, healthcare costs in the United States have risen faster than the rate of inflation. Meanwhile, 30% of healthcare spending is estimated to be unnecessary. What policy solutions do you support to address the rising costs of healthcare?
Well, so first I'll say more broadly that I believe the feds really need to act in this area. We need a national policy that supports affordable health care for all of our citizens in this country. But to bring it to the state level, where we're at right now is this state has declined to accept the Medicaid expansion that was designed to be part of the Affordable Care Act. Mm-hmm. It was designed to make healthcare more affordable. It's $10 billion with a B, $10 billion a year in healthcare subsidy funding that would open up access for hundreds of thousands of Texans, but more importantly, it would bring down cost globally across the state. And so that's something we can push for in the state legislature right now. It's something we can do right now.
Where do you stand on defending protections for people with pre-existing conditions? I mentioned in a couple of videos before is when we had private insurance, my wife didn't qualify to have a pregnancy. It was a pre-existing condition. And that blew my mind. And that's really where I started learning about what pre-existing conditions are. And, because I always had corporate health insurance. So where do you land on pre-existing conditions, John?
They need to be protected. And folks that have pre-existing conditions should not be discriminated against by insurance companies. There's a huge percentage of the American population that have pre-existing conditions. I have pre-existing conditions. My wife does. Everybody who lives in this house, pretty much, except for the 6-year-old we got. It's a long story. We have a niece that saves us, 6-year-old boy. He's probably the only one in the house that doesn't have a pre-existing condition. But pricing people out of coverage for this is just morally wrong. It's reprehensible, actually.
Right. What about Medicaid? Where do you fall on Medicaid? Because Medicaid and Medicare provide coverage for over 120 million people nationwide. There's been increasing threats to cut coverage over the past 2 years, and while this is a federal issue, the state does have some purview over how it's distributed, how it's enacted in our state. Where do you land on the current issue?
Well, I'll give you a piece of information and let you guess my position. Okay. So the piece of information is I also am part of a blended family. Like my parents got divorced and each got remarried when I was young. My full blood brother, out of nine of us, I have 8 siblings. I have the one who is a full blood brother is disabled and relies on Medicaid to keep him stable and to keep his insurance. And quite honestly, he would die without that support. So I think actually the Medicaid program works really well. And that's the argument that conservatives have made against expanding Medicaid in Texas is that we don't want to expand a federal program where we have some matching dollars or whatever nonsense they're saying. I find that to be nonsense. I think the program is well run, works well for the people who are on it, and it's a lifesaver for both my brother and my father, who's 80-ish.
Let's switch gears a little bit to education.
Okay.
Not education necessarily about public versus private or the voucher system, but more about as it relates to the school to prison pipeline. John, you may know that if a student is arrested in high school, they're 50% more likely to drop out before graduation. And people ask, well, don't get arrested. Okay, well, that's great. I guess it depends upon the communities and the types of schooling that you have. People can get arrested on small little things. Standing up for yourself against a bully, someone who's calling you very derogatory anti-Semitic names, or just leveraging a lot of Islamophobia against you, someone who hits you and you fight back. Even if you fight back, you can be arrested. Even if you defend yourself, you can be arrested. So let's put aside why get arrested in the first place for a moment. But if a student is arrested in high school, they're 50% more likely to drop out before graduation. Many high school students are arrested due to misconduct, and this whole process is referred to as a school to prison pipeline. John, what's one concrete step and or policy you would take to combat the school to prison pipeline?
Well, first I'm going to interject that I was suspended in high school as a freshman for facing down a bully. Wow. And we got into a physical altercation. You know, the kids circled around us and we were having it out. And so I was suspended for fighting a bully when I was 14 years old as a freshman in high school. And that I'll be honest, if I had not been a white child, I might have ended up in very dire straits because of that. Right. And it was a white kid that I was fighting. So the consequences for us were just that he ended up having to eat some grass and I got suspended from school. But there's more to this. It's not just what happens as they get older. Statistics show that if children are not reading on level by 3rd grade, they'll have a significantly higher propensity of ending up in jail or interacting with the criminal justice system. So the first thing that we do is we want to get those kids involved in school and reading on level. I'm a big proponent of all-day pre-K universally. So right now we do it for challenged communities. We just got that boon. I think it should be for all students. I also am a proponent of keeping schools open for extended hours with free tutoring. I think having the all-day facility for kids of all ages really helps working families that are struggling. And these are the challenged communities that are often at risk. And then the last thing is the STAR test is discriminatory and for lack of more diplomatic language, it screws over communities of color in a big way. It's discriminatory and it produces a result that pushes children away from literacy, and that's a problem. So those 3 things are really my platform for interrupting school to prison pipeline. There's one more thing. I'm so sorry. Oh, yeah. Is the disciplinary guidelines in schools where children of color and children from challenged communities are disciplined at a way proportionally higher rate, disproportionately high. And so there has to be uniform guidelines for that sort of stuff through our schools, because it again disproportionately disadvantages communities of color.
Absolutely. And it's interesting that you said, because that was my next question. And, because children, specifically children of color, have fallen victim to unequal policing and disciplinary policies in schools. And well, you just addressed that. Thank you. And so, speaking of unequal policing, after the killing of Mr. Floyd, we see what just happened with Miss Taylor. Absolutely no justice for her whatsoever. Her family received financial compensation, but there was no justice, no justice at all. Chief Acevedo and other police chiefs have gone on record to say that they believe if an officer is fired from one precinct, from one municipality, that they should not be allowed to be rehired. Because, in the state of Texas, this is low-hanging fruit on the police reform ladder. I serve on the mayor's police reform task force, which is just wrapping up right now. And so one of the things that Chief Acevedo has said over and over again, apart from removing bad apples, it's a complaint that he and many of the other chiefs and sheriffs in our state have, is that if a police officer is fired from one department, for whatever reason, fired, then they can still be rehired in another department in the same locality, or anywhere in the state of Texas. Their peace officer license isn't pulled until the second time they're fired. We know that our brave men and women of the armed forces, if they are dishonorably discharged once, that's all that you get, they can never hold a post in government. They can never hold a post in law enforcement, even in security. Would you agree with Chief Acevedo and other police chiefs around the state that officers should not be allowed to be rehired once they've been fired?
So first, this decision, you have to allow due process for the officer first.
Absolutely.
If they're fired for a cause and that bears out to be supported by a bunch of evidence, then yeah, I agree with that. And I think the strongest thing that we can do is have a database where all of the police organizations around the state, there's like 18,000 police organizations around the state or something like that, can access these records, because right now it's opaque. It's not transparent. Right. So a police officer's record, the reason for their firing, I do think that needs to be weighed and evaluated in a due process sort of way, because I could see the argument that's been made to me, actually, that makes sense, is, well, what if a police officer is in a discriminatory environment,
right,
and gets fired for a cause that's trumped up or not valid? Then you've wrecked somebody's career who might be one of the actual good ones in that particular department, right? So it has to be a due process conversation, but I do think keeping the database is a strong way to promote that. And so whatever their disciplinary record is, it doesn't need to be open to the public, but it does need to be accessible by the police departments. And I think police departments should be completely beholden to community oversight boards. So it needs to be accessible to those people who are charged with overseeing police departments. And that is a legislative change I am very much in favor of. Police departments need to be beholden to their communities.
Absolutely. And to be clear, we're not talking against our police departments or our law enforcement officers. What we're saying is that there are some bad apples, and those bad apples need to be weeded out of the system altogether, just like the Army, the Marine Corps, the Navy, the Air Force, and the Coast Guard do. They weed out the bad apples, and they say, bad apples, you've been weeded out, and there's no way, no chance in hell that you can come back, right?
I agree with that, and I think the police officers will agree with that stand, because they're having these bad actors inside of their organizations really besmirches them. Police, and the reason that I want community oversight is because to build the relationships between the police and the community. I think they should be tied much tighter together and work together to make our communities safer. I think that's the intent.
One of the ways we make our community safer as well, apart from law enforcement, is by seeing a more representative form of government, but specifically government that we can relate to. What I mean by that is Houston is one of the most diverse cities in the country. is the most diversity in the country. The county that I live in, Fort Bend County, is the most diverse county in the country. We know that this is what America will look like heading towards 2050, as the esteemed Professor Kleinberg of the Kinder Institute at Rice University has mentioned time and again. But we know this remains a talking point unless we see it reflected in our relationships and in our government, your office, other offices, elected representatives. What would you
Sorry,
do?
I just missed part of what you said. I had a connection
No,
problem.
I'm saying this diversity is just a talking point unless we see it represented in government, right? Unless people of color can see that their voices are being heard by people of color as well, not just a very homogenous looking government. What would you do to ensure diversity in all aspects of your office?
So first, I ensure diversity not just in all aspects of my office, in all aspects of my life. I'm uncomfortable in homogenous settings. I believe the rainbow of diversity enriches us all. Like I said, I have grown up in diverse environments, so it's not like I say I need this flavor, I need that flavor, I need that flavor. We're just inclusive in my office. So if you look at the makeup of the crew, I think is mostly female. And then I have my chief and probably my best friend Otis is a son of Nigerian immigrants. My legislative director is a white lady. The planner scheduler person is a Latina, and so it's just,
you're already diverse.
Yeah, we're diverse. I'm conscious of that, and I would be uncomfortable in an office that where everybody looked like me. And so for those that don't know, I'm a mechanical engineer from the oil and gas industry, and I led large scale development projects. I also did deep water intervention work, and so these are big undertakings where you have to have a lot of people to make it happen. And when I build project teams, like I was a project engineering manager of a manager of an engineering team that did projects, I hired not only diversity of race and gender, but I hired for diversity of background. Most of these engineering teams are just made up of engineers, and definitely you need some engineers to do engineering stuff. But I had liberal arts people. I had a scientist from oceanography. I had a physicist on my team, engineers of different stripes. But I feel like the diversity really adds to the strength of your community or your team. And so being able to have perspectives from different vantage points, I think it just enriches and strengthens us all.
Well, you mentioned underwater drilling, or you mentioned it wasn't underwater drilling. You said underwater.
It was deep water intervention.
Deep water intervention. Sorry, I'm trying to find a way to connect to the next topic. And the next topic is climate change. Recently, New Zealand's Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern stated that by 2030, New Zealand would be carbon neutral. I mentioned this time and again in every candidate Q&A, anyone that I talk to. She's sort of a personal hero of mine. The strides that she's made to make New Zealand more independent and obviously not dependent upon foreign oil has helped not just boost their economy, but their national security as well. You seem to be very, very passionate about climate change and mentioned implementing evidence-based climate change reforms. To be clear, climate change is not, because we're from Houston, we have to make sure all Houstonians know it's not in opposition to the oil and gas industry. It's about how do we work together to ensure that everyone is still employed 100%, but we create this balance between the needs for oil and the needs for Mother Earth, right?
Exactly.
What is one step you would take to make this a reality, to make climate change a key issue in our state? And what types of climate change reform would you take?
So I should ask you how much time y'all have, because this is topic for me.
We have about 10, 15 more minutes.
I only need a couple of minutes to talk about this. I'll summarize. So first, I'll say on the campaign trail right now, I'm being painted as a socialist that wants to destroy the oil and gas industry.
Why?
And it's funny because I've worked in oil and gas most of my adult life. I have forgotten more about oil and gas industry than most people will ever learn. And it's not that I'm an oil and gas fanboy. It's a key component of our economy and of our culture in Texas.
Right.
So I also believe that oil and gas companies can be profitable and productive and responsible and safe at the same time. So and we did that in the work that I did. Oil and gas are the operator. So I worked for companies that provided equipment and services. So our customers were customers like Exxon, Shell, British Petroleum, those companies. So I never worked for an operator. I'm not beholden to them. But I will tell you that if we want to remain leaders in the energy industry, in the energy landscape of the entire planet Earth here in Texas, and particularly here in Houston, we're going to have to embrace clean energy technology and clean energy industry. For one thing, it's the right thing to do, and it's the wave of the future. And for another thing, it is one of the fastest growing industries and one of the fastest growing job markets in the whole world, right? So being someone who's been in oil and gas and a very senior engineer, 20, almost 30 years of experience at this point, I know a lot of senior engineers that are struggling right now, particularly for offshore, deep water oil and gas, my former colleagues, having trouble and would love to work in green energy industry. And so what I'm saying is, first, we have this industrial infrastructure that's underutilized or unutilized, and it would map perfectly to green energy industry. So I'm going to be bringing resolutions and bills to promote the growth of green energy industry in Texas. I think it's going to be very well received because I approach these things from two aspects. One, it's the right thing to do. It's good for the planet. Two, it's fiscally responsible. It's a good way to bring money into the state and employ our people. So I'm just going to add that I don't know if you've watched the news, but BP today came out with a statement about how they're investing heavily in renewables and green energy because they see the contraction of their traditional market, and that we are quickly approaching peak of oil demand. And whether they're predicting that, whether that's true or not, I don't know. But what you're going to see, I believe, is operators moving towards green energy and promoting that growth. And I think we should provide incentives for them to bring that to Texas. We got the people, we have the facilities, they're underutilized. I would love to find a good job in green energy industry. After this is all over, I want to go back to making what an engineer makes instead of what a legislator makes. And for those that don't know, our constitutional salary as state legislators is $7,200 a year. So I do not want to be a lifetime politician. I want to go back to my life as a breadwinner in my household at some point.
Well, people forget that a lot of the jobs in oil and gas in Houston are not dependent upon our economy, but are dependent upon foreign economies and foreign policies of other nations, not our own nation. So Saudi Arabia, Qatar, the United Arab Emirates, so on and so forth. So our jobs rise and our jobs fall based upon the foreign policies of other nations, and that hurts our national security. And we have an opportunity and the ability and the know-how to be able to have green energy developed right here in Houston in the state of Texas.
And I think it's on us to develop that industry here, especially if we want to remain at the forefront of energy industry for the planet.
Absolutely. Switching gears to our last topic. In recent history, Congress people, state representatives, and appointees in our own state have shared worrisome posts regarding American Muslims, the American Jewish community, the American Chinese community, the Latino community, the Black community. Recently self-proclaimed Islamophobe Laura Loomer won the GOP nomination in Florida. And her hateful rhetoric surrounding Muslims is terrifying for all, but nonetheless, she's been successful. The Council on American Islamic Relations and other organizations have tracked upwards reported hate crimes and incidents of bias since 2016. For whatever reason, we won't go into that, but for whatever reason, we see bias incidents just having an upward trend. What would be your first step? Or what would be one of the steps that you take since you're running for re-election to combat Islamophobic, anti-Semitic, anti-xenophobia, hateful rhetoric towards people of color, Latinos, hateful rhetoric of anyone, whether through legislation, policymaking, or in public?
I do both legislation and policymaking. So remember, at the very beginning of this conversation, I said that was one of my prime motivators for running. And I come from integrated environments. So I'm actually disappointed. I'm 57 years old. I was born in 1963. And I'm disappointed that I thought we had come farther than this. And what's happened in recent years has laid bare a really grotesque, ugly underbelly of American society that includes too much of this element. So the first thing that I do is I'm outspoken about bigotry and discrimination in my personal life, online. I'm one of those people that no matter what room I'm in or who I'm with, you get me the way I am. And so when people start with that kind of stuff, whether we witness it in person or we see it on TV, I'm outspoken about those things in public and in private, in my private life. The second thing is I've actually started my legislative career by forwarding anti-bigotry legislation. We debated what was going to be first. It's going to be healthcare, public education. If you go research me, the first bill I ever filed was the one that makes it a crime to call 911 out of bias or prejudice. And I know it's more of the Black community and elements of the brown community that sees this, but the language I put in there was perception of religion. So it doesn't matter what your religion is. If someone is exercising prejudice against you because of what they think you look like or what they think you are, to me, that's the problem. It doesn't matter if you are brown and go to church. If someone thinks you're a Muslim and commits acts of prejudice or violence against you, they should be accountable for that. So I'm working that into all of these anti-discrimination bills. It's not, you don't need to protect a class. You need to prevent racism. You need to prevent bigotry. You need to interrupt that cycle of violence. And so I think that's the way to go about that. I'm very passionate on this issue. I don't tolerate it from friends, from acquaintances, and I want to encourage everybody, whether you look like me or not, I want to encourage everybody to stand against intolerance, bigotry, and racism in your lives, because how we get rid of it is we don't tolerate it. We hold those people accountable.
It's one of the few times that I'm okay with the zero tolerance policy. John, in wrapping up, what's a message that you would like to give to our audience?
The message is, in this time of divisiveness and difficulty, love conquers all. And so be driven by love. Be driven by your love of humanity, your love of your fellow humans, your community, and let's combat that. The way to fight hate is with love, and there's no more powerful force on the planet. So I'm just going to encourage people to act out of love and call it out when you see people who don't.
Thank you, Representative Jon Rosenthal, running for HD 135. My name is Sharik Abdul Ghani. I am the director of Minaret Foundation, where our focus is to lift American Muslim voices for change through multi-faith and civic engagement. John's been part of our candidate Q&A series, where we're interviewing different legislators and hopeful legislators running for office in the path to November. Thank you again, Jon, for sharing your words, your thoughts, and being so generous with your time.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. I really appreciate the time.